People, it is Winston here, your favorite dyslexic book nerd, and I have an awesome guest with me today, KB Brookins, the author of Pretty, his memoir, and say hi to the beautiful people.
What's good? Thank you so much for having me here at EL. I'm looking forward to chatting about books.
Yes, I love it. So I was on TikTok, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw someone else's TikTok video, Naomi. I saw her TikTok video about your book.
Nice.
I was like, I didn't even know, I had never heard of the book, right? And I was like, okay, let me go check this book out. Cause anything trans, as a black trans man, I'm always down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went, I bought the book, and I was like, yo, I'm gonna reach out and see if they would sit down with me so we could talk about the book. And so I'm so glad you're here. So glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Um, First off, I felt like you was talking to me in the book. like
Yeah.
like I felt like you was talking to me in the book. I felt like it was a love letter to I know to me and probably to a whole lot of other boys like me. What inspired you to put your story on paper?
I mean, truly because I wanted to have a book for us. Like, early in my transition, right, I started doing the medical part of my transition during 2020, right? So I'm like isolated as we all were, and like my body is changing kind of before my eyes. My voice getting deeper. I'm getting facial hair. My chest is flat. All that stuff. And I saw, once I kind of started to emerge back into, going out and doing stuff, yeah, people treated me differently, right? Based on what I look like, based on how they perceived my gender. And I was like, that's interesting. And like when I talk to like, white trans dudes, they'd be like, yeah, I went from being seen as like dainty and like harmless to like being seen as like a person that has all the power. And I'm like, I don't know if that quite happened for me, like in the same way, right? Because my transness comes with blackness. And I wanted to find a book, right, on this kind of black masculinity from a trans perspective, right? And there's like a wide range of like black masculinity studies, right? And a wide range of LGBTQ plus studies, right? And I was just like, but I'm thinking about a very specific thing. And I feel like I'm not able to find it, or at least not able to find it outside of the like walls of academia. So I was like, let me just write down like some stories, right, that I feel like are just things that I've told for a while now, and also things that like people like me understand, right? Because folks like me, black, trans, masculine folks, like also deserve literature that like reflects their experience. Because I spent a lot of my time feeling like I was the only one. Like growing up in a very religious household in the South, right? A lot of times I was kind of being even like treated as if like there was something wrong with me, when it's like, no, there are other people in the world like me, so many others. And I wanted to touch those folks and also just like release some stuff that I had been holding on to for a while, as a memoir tends to do. So yeah, the impetus was communal as well as individual.
I love it.
Yeah.
Um, let's see, I annotated, whatever. Y'all know, don't judge me.
I'm,
like I'm messing up things all the time, but it's just who I am.
mhm.
Um, there was a part that like hit me really, really hard, and I was like, whoa. Um, and it was, well, several parts hit me hard, but I guess it was in the beginning of the book, and it says my mother smiled big, then nodded in silence. That was the first sentence of a book that describes my undoing. That was the first story someone ever told for me.
Mhm.
And so it hit me really hard because I feel like, in my journey to being this person that I am, that there were so many times people were telling the story that wasn't mine.
Mhm.
you know. And even early on in my transition, I felt that way,
Mhm.
because the other thing that I find refreshing about the book is that um there is another part in there that says there are so many different ways to express being black and trans. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, in the beginning of my transition, I felt like even in community they were trying to make me fit into this box
Right.
that I didn't fit in. And
Mm.
so then I felt like I didn't belong because I didn't fit into the box,
Yep.
you know? So that hit me hard right there. That hit me hard. And so um do you feel like as a community we still have a ways to go in that area?
Mm. Yeah, man, it's so silly. Like sometimes I log on to social media and people are still talking about stuff that I feel like they were talking about when I was in high school. Like, oh, can studs date each other? Or like, oh, I feel like people are not masculine like they used to be. Like all of this kind of stuff, right? Where I'm like, why are we still having this like cyclical type of conversation where it's like we know that there's no one way to be a woman, no one way to be a man, no one way to be non-binary. I think you just gotta like let people tell you who they are and respect that from there because they are gonna know more about themselves than you are, right? And then also like, gender is not the same thing as sexuality, right? You can't just assume someone's sexuality based on how they present themselves to you. So it's definitely still a lot of ways to go. And I would even say like, I grew up in a very religious household where everyone was assumed to be cisgender and straight. And then like once I kind of got my first queer community in high school, it was even like amongst these like what at the time, right, we call like studs, where it's like yeah, something is different about you, right? And we can't like quite put our finger on it, but we know that like you are different, right? So I definitely also like was picking up what you was putting down. Like I felt like a bit ostracized in the kind of lesbian sapphic community that I was in. And I think that that ultimately comes down to like some of it is ignorance, right? Just like not knowing what you don't know. I didn't know what non-binary was when I was in high school. I didn't know like that, I knew like generally that when people said these things about me, like I don't agree, and like why do you care? With like, okay, you should only be dating a person that looks like this and X, Y, and Z. I'd be like, yeah, I feel like I don't know why you care, but I didn't know the language as to like how to talk about that. And I acquired that language over time by reading books, right, and by like just um, getting to know more people in the queer and trans community, like. I recognize that I don't have every single identity, right? It's LGBTQIA, and so many other identities past that. So I had to really just keep myself open to learning more, right? About different people's experiences. And once I learned more language for like who I was, it was over after that. Nobody could tell me anything. But yeah, it's definitely like intercommunally some work that we need to do. And I think that work has a lot to do with just educating each other, right? When we say problematic things around each other, it takes like just one person saying like, so why do you think that? Right? Like, and I find a lot of times, I find myself in situations because a lot of people assume that I'm like a cis dude when they know nothing about me. So when I'm around like other dudes, even I'd be like, yeah, so why you think that way? Or what brought you to this conclusion about this woman or whatever? And once you get people to start questioning the things that they believe, then they can, be open to changing their mind when they get more information. Um, and yeah, like making sure that we give people safe spaces to be wrong. Like sometimes people are dead wrong. And like sometimes they don't feel like compelled to say that they're wrong or to admit that they're wrong because they're too scared that people will judge them, ostracize them, whatever, whatever, right? And I'm not saying to like, simp out for those people, but like I think there are always ways that we can like break up, problematic things without at the same time like discouraging people from being like honest, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I dig it.
Yeah.
I dig it. Um one of the other things was black existence is already synonymous with worry,
Mhm.
right? I was like, no, I never really thought about it like that, right? Like
Mhm.
yeah, I'm always worrying about something. Like I think it's embedded in our 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 DNA, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, how we get past that, like, you know what I mean? And then it felt good being treated like a girl until it didn't.
Mhm.
Like I felt that too. Like even though I can't really remember, maybe because it's been so long, right? Because I'm 53 now. I turned 53 on the 27th of September, right? Was my birthday. And so I turned 53. And so I really don't remember much about that time in my life, but I do remember um like little things, like if I did something that was perceived to be feminine and my
Mhm.
parents were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
you good to," you know what I'm saying, versus the things I did that were like, "Don't do that." That whole thing about your mom saying, there are men around, that thing hit hard for me too, because I'm like, yeah, I used to be that. Why? Like, why? I don't
Mhm.
understand. And so there were a lot of points in the book that like interconnected with me, you know what I mean? And so um and then um there was a part about church. What did it say?
Yeah, a lot of stuff about church in there for sure.
Yes. Oh, there's still black churches out there not letting their queer folks be honest. Queerness still impacts how I navigate space.
Mhm.
So, would you still consider yourself a believer or a spiritual person? Do you still um have issues in navigating those spaces, or do you even navigate those spaces at all anymore?
Yeah, these are large questions. I'm gonna try to go one by one.
Okay.
So as far as black existence is synonymous with worry, I mean that was honestly like coming from personal experience as well as experience of other black folks that I'm in community with, where we like, we tense up when we see a cop car, right? Like, and we're worried, like, okay, I need to not go outside with a hoodie on. Like, those are things that we have to consider just because of history, right? Because of the history of our people. And then like, when it's a space where it's just us, right? That sometimes I feel like, of elevatedness, like when I'm in spaces like that. And I don't think that has to do with black people changing anything about themselves. It has to do with the rest of the world, not being racist, right? Not being anti-black, and not letting their anti-blackness like seep into like the everyday lives of black people. Like, we have a real issue in the US of like police violence, and I think that there are a lot of platitudes that, politicians and others will give us for like, we need to change this. And it's like, well, how? Right? Like, we need an actual plan forward that's not just going to keep us in this same position year after year after, another tragedy happens that goes viral and then like nothing changes. Or, the police in this country are the only profession that I know of that gets raises when they do a bad job. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
for real.
they get raises, they get more money thrown at the problem, but it's like maybe that's not where we need to throw the money. Maybe instead we throw the money at social services, we throw the money at racial sensitivity trainings. Yet that's starting to get outlawed in some places. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a lot of things that others need to do, not necessarily us, right? We got to just start living, and people got to allow us to live. And as far as like being a believer, I mean, honestly, I had a lot of church trauma, like from growing up and being so embedded in the church. I grew up with a family that had a gospel singing troupe. You know what I mean? I was one of those kids that was in church Wednesday, Sunday, and sometimes Saturday. Like I was there all the time. My daddy cut the yard at the church. He was a preacher at the church. My mama played the piano. Like I was there all the time. So I was like kind of constantly exposed to like other people's bigotry as it pertained to queer and trans people. Now I'm old enough now to know that not all churches are like that. You know what I mean? There are churches now that understand the like historical, just violence that church folk have inflicted upon, queer and trans people, and they're trying to right those wrongs. But still, to this day, I can pop up in a church and they're doing some kind of, sermon about how it's wrong to be gay, X, Y, and Z, and really twisting scripture to really like adhere to their own bigotry, right? But I know, I've read the Bible back and forth a number of times just because of my upbringing, right? And I've heard all different kinds of preachers interpret the same verse differently. I just know ultimately that like you don't necessarily a church is like a community center, right? And
Mhm.
like if that community center is not one that's working for you, you can go to another one. But also like spirituality is a very individual thing. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
you have a relationship with God and it's your relationship. It's not nothing to do with the building, right? So I don't particularly consider myself like spiritual, or I should say religious. But I do recognize, or at least like for me in particular, I'm like, there has to be a divine being, right? Because there are a lot of things in the world that are not easily explained by science. But I'm okay, right? With not knowing like what that divineness is. I also know that like religion is so regional, right? Like, who am I to say that this like whole country that is like a majority, right, Muslim country is like going to hell because they don't like practice Christianity. Like, it's just not my place to do that personally, I think. So I would consider myself agnostic. And, luckily I've been able to write these, experiences that I've had in the Black church, in my specifically like Baptist, missionary church that I grew up in. Um,
Ah,
yeah, and realize, and be exposed to like people who are not like that. But yeah.
yeah, I came up Baptist too.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know that. I know that life.
It's hard.
Now it is unless I'm living under a rock, but I don't think I am. I might be, but no, I don't think that I am. There's not a lot of trans books out, right? Like this type of trans book, like memoirs or just trans stories written by um black trans people, right?
Mhm.
Um so what was the process for you getting published? Was that I'm assuming it was hard. Was because it's already hard for black people in general.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Then you add in black and trans, and then
Right, right. The U.S. literary industry is a very particular one, very underrepresented as far as people of color goes. I think, like, when I say literary industry, I'm not just talking about the publishers, right? I'm talking about the editors that work at those publishers, the publicists that, get the word out about your book. I'm talking about the agents who represent your book, and it's just overwhelmingly white, right? So there is like a big issue around that where it's like, okay, if the lens is white, right, that means that, we're only getting exposed to like a certain number, right, of stories, not from that lens. And then like they are really sometimes craving a very specific kind of story, if you know what I mean.
I know.
So with me, right, my trade is poetry, where we are very accustomed to being, making our own spaces if we need to, right? Very accustomed to, spitting some poems at a random bar someplace. Like that's my background, right? So when I came to this memoir and realized that it was a memoir, I decided to just ask different black queer writers that I knew just like questions about this whole process. Like, all right, I'm a little confused. Like, how does this work? Blah blah blah. Another thing about the literary industry, it works on a lot of like unwritten rules, right? So like there's not a lot of articles out there about like how do you get an agent? How do you sell a book? Like it's just stuff that you have to ask around about, which is a thing that I'm not particularly a fan of, and I've spoken to a whole lot on social media. but yeah, I got introduced to the person that eventually like got me my agent, Annie DeWitt. And she went out with my book, and I'm not gonna lie, some places was like, I just feel like I don't get the cultural references of this book, so I think I can't edit it for that reason, or maybe I feel like I'm not the right editor for this because of it being a book that is not like particularly in right now, all of that kind of stuff. And it's a book that is multi-genre, right? It has essays, it has poetry, it has photos. And not all editors, right, are interested in poetry for various reasons. So, it was an uphill battle. I consider myself very like lucky to be one of the people who get published. Right, there are a lot of voices that we don't hear from because of how hostile the literary industry can be to people like me. So it took some editing. It took like just aligning myself with the right people at the right time. You know what I mean? My editor Ed Knopf Arrow was just ultimately open to like not knowing everything. Right, he's a cis black dude. I'm writing a lot about masculinity in the book, and he found it to be, singular and interesting. So we worked together on it. But yeah, it was not easy. First, just writing it, right, and
Mm.
being the person that could like have enough perspective to like write a book of this sort, and then it definitely wasn't easy publishing it, but I got to the publication day. I've gotten to conversations, like this one with you, and that was really what kept me going throughout the whole process. I'm like, I want this to be a book that then people can read it and be like, finally, I see myself in literature. Because we've been asked all of our lives to see ourselves in, Huckleberry Finn and Shakespeare and all of these other voices that are reflective of other people. The white girls can't be the only people that read a book and be like, that's so me. You know what I mean? Like I want,
Right.
some black kid in the South and what people call flyover states to pick up this book and be like, yes, that is so me. So that's definitely what kept me going.
Definitely need more books, like
Yeah.
more. We need more our voices heard more in those spaces. Like I had that conversation recently with another queer author who I love all his work.
Hmm.
Terry J. Ben Walker, right? So I just reviewed his latest book, and we were talking about like if I had had this book when I was this age, it would have changed the trajectory of all of this that happened. You know what I mean? And I feel like your book is definitely gonna be that for some some young up and coming and some old like I transitioned in my late 40s, so you know and they ain't had no book for me then neither.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's refreshing to for the hopes um that the youth that comes behind us has something, and also that people of all ages, no matter when you start to take that journey, that there is a book that you can look at and say, okay,
Yeah.
I see me, I see those things in this book that connect with my journey. So
Right.
any new projects in the works?
Oh man, what a scary question. Well, I'm writing stuff here and there. I think anything that I'm writing right now is a little too early to talk about because I am a very like superstitious person. Like I don't want to talk about it too early because then it may not happen. Like so, I'm working on stuff. I'm always gonna be popping my stuff, in these books. So it's just a matter of me finishing something that I like enough and then sending it out.
Got you.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice for someone who wanted to put out a book or wanted to start writing?
Mm. Well, first, don't wait on permission to just do it, right? I think writing is one of the most accessible art forms in the sense that all you need is a pen, a notebook, a library card, and you got access to like everything you need. You know,
Yeah.
how I learned to be a writer initially was just some rundown, high school classroom where I had a teacher that believed in us enough to like push us to become better poets, right? And for us to even like know contemporary poetry. Before that classroom, I thought poetry was like, old dead white dudes. So it's just about like exposing yourself to what's out there, right?
Right.
And libraries is one of the last like, accessible resources we have that is completely free, and they're in every city, right? So making use with what you got right now is the number one thing, right? Don't feel like you gotta buy this $500 computer program in order to be a writer. That you gotta go and spend a lot of money at a university to be a writer, right? Like you can start with what you got right now, right? And then like honestly, like immerse yourself in a local community, right? I'm hard pressed to find a city that doesn't have like at least one open mic, right? So going to those places and talking to the people around you. If you like a poem that you hear, if you like a short story that you hear, going up to those writers and being like, "I like this," and this really spoke to me in this way. Can we get connected, etc. Going to bookstores in your local area, right? And talking to the staff there. When I first moved to Austin, Texas, which is where I live now, one of the first things I did was just go to like every. I was jobless too, but I went to like every bookstore, every open mic, every reading series I could, and just was talking to people there, like trying to see like what's going on here, what do people care about here. So having that curiosity with your own writing, but also having that curiosity about your local community, right? And that's also how I got my first couple of shows, like asking a bookstore, like, do you need somebody to introduce this writer that you'll have, in a couple weeks, or can I get a slot on that open mic? Like asking. The worst thing they can say is no, right? And you don't get good at things like performing your own work until you just do it a lot. So giving yourself, finding those opportunities to do it a lot, I think is good. And then once you do get to the point where you're like, okay, now I want to try to publish my stuff. Doing those Googles, I mean, like, honestly, my first couple of things that I like submitted to literary magazines and to presses, probably a hot mess, right? But I was like learning as I went, and like asking, people who is doing it successfully, like questions, like, and it's best to ask like laterally rather than vertically, as in like maybe don't, approach Stephen King and be like, how you do that, right? Like asking a person right next to you
Right.
that's in your local community, like, oh, I saw that you got this poem published with, insert magazine. Like, how did you go about submitting this, and asking the necessary questions and Googling answers and stuff like that. And it's just like a from the ground up thing. I truly consider myself a writer that really just like came out of the mud. Like I didn't, have any classes on the business of writing or whatever. I offer those classes now because I recognize like it didn't need to be as hard as it did for me. But yeah, man, staying curious, like getting up and like taking yourself seriously from the get go is what I would suggest.
I like that. Y'all heard that? Take yourself seriously. Ask those questions. Get out there.
Hmm.
Definitely. That's honestly how I ended up writing for the magazine.
Hmm.
Is on my 50th birthday, I decided anything and everything that I thought that I might want to do, I was just gonna do it. Right.
Hmm.
And so then I sent the email asking about how does one submit, articles or whatever to the magazine, and our editor reached out and said, "Oh, this is the process," and
Hmm.
and that's how I started. And now we working on year 3. I've been writing for the magazine for 2 years. Thank you.
Nice.
And then so me and the editor, we talk constantly, right? And so I was talking about all these books I was reading, and I was getting back into reading because I'm dyslexic, and so it's always been a challenge for me, but it's always been something that I really love, right?
Hmm.
And so then she was like, "Hey, so you should start um book reviews." And I was like, "What?" But hey, I said When I turned 50, anything and everything that sounded like something I would want to do, boom.
Yep.
So, you know, so here I am. It'll be a year in January since I started book therapy.
Nice.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm super, and I've got to meet some amazing people like yourself and have some amazing conversations about your books and just life in general, which has been a blessing for me. Um, speaking about books, right, and libraries,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the climate we're currently in and the
Mm-hmm.
book ban and going on, like, what's your thoughts or feelings on that?
Mm. Thoughts and feelings are the people trying to ban books know that books are powerful, know that books change culture, know that books can have the power to change someone's mind about a previously held belief that they once had about Black people, about queer and trans people, about disabled people, etc. And we in a mode where people trying to go full fascism, and like I think it's up to us, as consumers of literature to push back on that by reading those banned books, right? A thing that they don't realize is when you try to ban the book, it just ricochets and brings more people to it, you know? So like I try to stay abreast on like, okay, what books are getting banned? What books can I support, right? How can I support those authors? Because it can be very very disheartening, right, as an author to put all of this time and effort into publishing a book, and then some whoever, like in some county, is just like, oh, we need to ban this, right, because it depicts queerness or whatever. It's always like very surface level reasons. And supporting those authors, following them on social media, interacting with their posts, going to their book events when they have them, checking out those books at the library. Some people think, checking out a book at the library is inferior to buying the book. Of course, buying the book puts money in authors' hands, but also checking out the book tells the library, like, hey, this is a popular book, and then they end up buying more of them, right? So, like, you're still helping authors by doing that. And talking to people about the books that you like, dropping reviews. Anybody can drop a review on Goodreads, on Storygraph, NetGalley, all of those places. So like also telling people about those books. I know a couple people that like they won't even read a book until they like check the reviews online and whatever. So like you're doing us a solid by doing those things. So doing those things to combat, all of the hateful rhetoric that is surrounding book bans. I also know that there are a number of organizations that are kind of specifically um, in place to push against those things at the legislative level. So figuring out what your local chapter of those organizations are. I know I'm like a part of Authors Against Book Bans. I know there's probably something around that for like Readers Against Book Bans. So finding those like local chapters and getting involved at the legislative level too is awesome.
Thank you. So, do you have any favorite authors?
Man, that changes as the days change,
I
But
love that.
I can tell you authors that I was really enamored with while I was writing Pretty, which would definitely be Kiese Layman. So Kiese Layman has a really amazing memoir called Heavy. He also has a essay collection called How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. Really awesome. It is as bombastic as the title is. He also has a novel called Long Division. I've read all of the books. I love them. I also love his like stuff on social media that he posts. There's another one, Hanif Abdurakib. He's a really amazing poet as well as nonfiction writer. His most recent book is called "There's Always This Year." It's on like basketball and his like thoughts behind that. But he has also my favorite book by him is called "A Little Devil in America," and it's about like black performances, and it's really really interesting. So those two, definitely also love Denez Smith. Denez is a queer black writer, poet from Minnesota. They have a book that just came out called Bluff. My favorite book by them is called "Don't Call Us Dead." It's just a really amazing poetry collection, really accessible. So if anyone is like afraid of poetry, right, this is like a really great kind of book to read in the sense that it won't averse you, right? It'll only fill you. So yeah,
I'm gonna have to check that book out.
yeah,
My TBR, I feel like it just got longer.
yeah. It's always getting longer.
I swear it is as long as my lifespan.
Yeah,
Ah, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I so appreciate it. Tell my readers where they can find you.
I'm on the internet at Earth2KB. That's EARTHTOKB. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Twitter because I don't like the new name for it. I I'm also at earth2kb.com. That's my website. It has all of my writings on there, as well as some free zines and stuff like that, resources. And yeah, catch me if you're local to Austin, Texas. Like I be out and about at the barbecues, at the drag shows, and all that stuff. So yeah,
You be out there in the street.
I try to. I try to stay out there.
I feel that. All right, y'all. Listen, they told you where you could find them. Y'all go find them. And while y'all going, y'all need to grab this book. Pretty.
Yeah.
So hit your local bookstore, your Amazon, wherever you need to get it. Y'all need to get it. Y'all need to read it. It is an awesome read. Until next time, y'all do me a favor and y'all go read a book.
Thank you.